Hello, champs and people and aliens and robots and what have you not. We're going to look at Windows 95 today, or this video from 2 years ago, because apparently it was Windows' birthday, or Windows 95's birthday. Windows 95's history and features, Crazy Ken's Tech Talk. This is from Computer Clan, actually really good channel, link to it down below.
Happy birthday, Windows 95! You introduced the world to the start menu and so much more. Man, they grow up so fast.
Yeah.
So today, to celebrate this amazing occasion, we're going to time travel and take a look at the history and some of the features of one of the greatest OS releases in history. Hey guys, how are you all doing? Really? That's just great. You know, I'm doing pretty great today too, because we're going to time travel back to the hype days of Windows 95.
Oh yeah, baby.
Microsoft spent over $300 million on the marketing for Windows 95. It clearly paid off, so good for them. Part of this marketing effort was a commercial featuring the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up song, omitted for copyright reasons, and lighting up the Empire State Building in the Windows flag colors. And that's it.
That's what marketing does. Granted, Microsoft and Windows was really well known back then, and they were already a big player in the field, but there is a reason why the marketing budget for every game you see, every video you see, every movie you go to, every product that you have ever owned or know about is sometimes 3, 4, 5 times bigger than the actual production, R&D, and development budget. Marketing fucking works, people.
What about the... Nope. That's all there was to it. But you forgot to mention the cyber... We're not going to talk about that. Come on, Ken. Okay. The cyber sitcom featuring Matt Perry and Jennifer Aniston.
Taskbar? Is that anything like a Snickers bar?
Okay, honestly, I thought it was kind of funny. I mean, hey, it's better than this.
But don't worry, William, just hand the disk to me. I've got several applications looking mighty slick, running under Windows 386.
Yeah, that was the 90s, by the way. A lot of crazy shit happened in the 90s. Like the mid to late 80s, or mid to 80s to about the late 90s is kind of a period in history where a lot of shit happened, a lot of great technology happened, great music happened. Well, from the 80s to the 2000s. Still to this day, there's a lot of great music happening. But the 80s and 90s are kind of like, 2 decades where we're a little bit like... Let's not talk about a lot of shit happened there. Mostly filled up with either coke or Molly and LSD and yeah.
Yeah, that was a real thing. Then, on August 24th, 1995, Microsoft held a launch party with Jay Leno, 500 journalists, 2,000 guests, and 9,000 Microsoft employees. And of course...
There's a video on YouTube. Well, there's a lot of videos on YouTube about Windows 95, but if you can find the launch party YouTube video, it's actually really fucking great to watch. It like, hype fucking works. And we need to do more of that with Linux, because it fucking works.
Of course, Bill Gates himself. So with the marketing efforts and the hype building up, when the launch officially happened, Microsoft sold 4 million copies / licenses of Windows 95.
And the Steam Deck have only sold 1 million.
In one day. And in the first year...
In 1 year, by the way, with the Steam Deck.
40 million. So now that we know that stuff, let's go back in time even further. Back to the beta days of Windows 95. With codename Chicago. One of the earliest builds of Windows 95 to leak was Windows Chicago Build 58S. And
yeah, go watch, it's actually up here. A history of Windows 95 development. MJD is making great videos about anything, basically. Yeah, but it's a really interesting video.
And as you can see, the taskbar and the start menu were present. They were just very primitive. The file cabinet program was the replacement for the file manager we had in Windows 3. And in later builds, the file cabinet became Windows Explorer, which we'll take a look at later. It's also worth noting that the minimize and maximize buttons started to take shape with the icons we're familiar with today.
Think about that. That little thing, the minimize, maximize, close button, that whole paradigm. Some operating systems, I don't know, I think macOS has something similar also before that, and from 1995 up till today, this is, if you show this on any window today, almost everyone you show that to know exactly what to do with those 3 buttons. or those 3 icons, or what you will call them, mostly because of Windows 95. Think about that. It's mind-blowing that there's a lot of other things, but that did simple thing. Windows 95 basically made a non-concern nowadays, a given now. It's kind of like, oh yeah, of course it's minimized, of course it's maximized, of course it's close. We don't think about it today. It's just like, yeah, it's like, if I slapped you in the face and got you fucking drunk and got a midget to blow you off, and I told you what a dash on a window represent, a square on a window represent, and a cross on a window represent, you will exactly say it 100% after you may have been, alleviating some fluids into this midget. But yeah, you will probably be like, yeah, that's a minimize, that's a maximize, and that's a close.
But the close button has not been implemented quite yet. To close a window, you could still use the menu in the upper left. Next to the start menu, which wasn't officially labeled a start menu yet, there was a search feature and a help feature, which were eventually unified into the start menu in later builds. And the rest of the taskbar wasn't fully fleshed out yet in this particular build. Today, we're used to seeing running applications show up in the taskbar, so we could easily switch between them. And while that feature was introduced in Windows 95, this particular build did not support that. And when you minimized
again, icons on the taskbar, all of the, just the way the taskbar functions, this whole paradigm that they laid out in 1995, we are still using to this day. GNOME is using some of the same paradigms. KDE for sure is, XFCE is, Cinnamon is, unless you're running fuck it, even people with a tiny Windows manager is using TintPanel or something like that to get a panel that do this fucking thing to some extent here, more or less. The same with GNOME, They have a clock on it. They have shown, a system tray up there. They have a way to go into your applications from up there. Or workspaces. Same paradigms. And you can trace that down to Windows 95.
Windows, they wouldn't shrink into the taskbar like we're used to. Instead, they would transform into blocks that you could actually drag around the desktop. Oh, and in case you were wondering, the Dr. Watson program was the debugger for this particular beta system. In a later build, running programs would appear in the taskbar, and later, the start menu was actually labeled Start, and the 3 buttons we saw earlier were combined into one simple menu. And if you wanted to drag the taskbar around, go nuts! Put it wherever you want. Build 189 was the first leaked build to be branded as Windows 95. Other Windows 95 branded builds likely existed, maybe even out in the public somewhere, but to the general public, Build 189 was the first well-known beta version of Windows to actually call itself Windows 95.
I remember these days, man.
And by this time, the visual details of the system are nearly complete, but the start menu still looked a bit different than in the retail release. Keep in mind that this particular build was compiled on September 21st, 1994, and Windows 95 didn't come out until August 24th, 1995, so we still had 11 months to go. Over that time, there were plenty of other beta builds and test releases compiled. And before we move on, I just want to thank Michael MJD for providing some of the footage for this episode. He does a much bigger deep dive into the Chicago build, so definitely go check those out. But for now, enough beta talk. Let's hop into the 95 retail release and talk about some of its features. And my favorite thing about the Windows 95 release is so many of the features in it were kind of like the origin stories of features we still use today in Windows 10. Let's take a look.
And 11.
The biggest feature
and Linux, and even Mac OS.
Was the introduction of the Start menu. Documents and programs could be easily accessed from a simple menu instead of having to deal with the file manager and the program manager in the previous systems. The taskbar was another new feature, something we still use today all the time in Windows, and it allowed
and Linux, and you get what I'm saying.
You to easily switch between open programs. And nowadays, we use this stuff without even thinking about it, so we might take it for granted, but this was a pretty big deal back then. Windows Explorer was also first introduced in Windows 95, and this file browser replaced the file manager from previous systems. The Windows Explorer featured some new right-click shortcuts for power users, which included a quick view feature, which let you preview contents of a file without opening that file in a program.
Do we even have that under Linux? A quick view feature? I actually forgot about this feature here.
Also introduced for the first time was the My Computer shortcut, which allowed users to see connected devices and information about their computer. For example, they could look at their printers. And although the My Computer shortcut stuck around for a long time in Windows, we don't really use it or see it much more today, but I'll tell you what we do see still, the recycle bin. This
Yeah.
feature was also introduced in Windows 95. If a user deletes a file, it would simply move to the recycle bin, just in case they wanted to undelete.
If you're looking at the origin of having a trash can directory on the desktop, well, recycle bin was probably the first time we saw this. I'm not sure, but I think this is the first operating system that had like a trash can recycle bin where you delete the stuff went into, so you can undelete it and manage it that way.
The file later. And here's another big change, something we probably still take for granted today. Long file names. Previous to Windows 95, unless you were using certain Windows NT releases, in the Windows world, you could only have file names with 8 characters before the file extension. So you had to find creative ways to abbreviate your documents and everything. But with Windows 95, the character limit expanded to 255 characters. So good, that was pretty convenient. And even though you didn't need to use DOS to start up Windows 95 anymore, like you had to with the previous Windows systems, you could still run DOS programs inside of Windows, either in full screen mode or in a window. So kudos to Microsoft for keeping that compatibility. I think that's something they do really well in the PC space. They seem to pay attention a lot to backward compatibility. But in addition to that, Windows 95 also paved the way for 32-bit applications on Windows, in addition to Windows NT, which already had that. But in the more consumer space, Windows 95 helped push 32-bit apps out to users, which would potentially run much faster than their 16-bit counterparts. And you probably already saw this, but the close, minimize, and maximize buttons are now present in the upper right of the windows, laid out in a very similar fashion to what we're used to today.
Yep.
And even though Internet Explorer wasn't initially bundled with Windows 95, it was available in Windows 95 with Microsoft Plus. And
the good old Plus packs. They did this a lot in the 90s with the software. They had like this expansion package called Plus or Advanced or whatever the fuck, Premium. And think about a little bit like what we're doing in gaming today. So you get like the base game and then you get the Premium edition with extra stuff and features. And that was basically what Microsoft Plus was. It was the Microsoft Premium experience. And
in some other bundles, depending on where you bought your computer from. So this marked the beginning of the Internet Explorer era, which lasted quite a long time. I mean, it's still used today. Not a ton. It's starting to get phased out more, and we have Microsoft Edge to replace it too.
Yeah.
But, man, still, kudos to you, Internet Explorer. You lasted a very long time.
Well, it lasted a long time because a lot of people bought Windows and it was bundled with Windows, which is kind of fucking crappy, okay? That's why they made it the most popular browser. They bundled it with Windows, and people were like, oh, there's an instant browser. Why should I download another one?
Maybe a little longer than you should have, but that's none of my business. And I know I haven't covered all of the new features in Windows 95, but if I missed any that you really liked, feel free to let me know about those in the comments. Now, some could argue that these Windows 95 features weren't anything new because other operating systems were already doing this stuff. Heck, even the Macintosh had a trash feature in version 1. That was back in 1984. But most of the time, that doesn't really matter. And Apple would even defend that. On the iPhone, they weren't the first with cut, copy, paste or with multitasking.
True.
But they still took their time to make it right. They did it well, and people loved it. But they weren't the first.
And that's the great debate, because who's more important? The ones that made it the first or the ones that made it popular? And some say that it don't matter who was the first one to do something if they couldn't put it into people's hands or make people use it. So the most important is the ones that make it popular. My philosophy is that, well, you need the ones to do it the first and the ones to make it popular. You can't have one. Apple could not just, well, they probably could have invented copy-paste, but it will take longer and a lot of fucking try and error and stuff. You get what I'm saying here. They're building on top of the shoulders of giants. And you need those shoulders to stand on for it to become successful. So you need both. But who is the ones we should credit the most? The ones that make it popular or the one that started it out? And it depends on what you are. If you're an engineer or techie and stuff like that, you'll probably go for the original people that did it because they were the first ones to do it. They came up with the technology, the code base, the design for it. If you're more like a business person, marketing person, consumer person, you're more interested in the ones that made it usable for the consumer and put it into consumers' hands. So I think there we are talking a little bit about different type of people clashing a little bit, but you can't have one without the other, if you ask me.
And that's okay. So even though some of these features did come into Windows a little bit later compared to other operating systems, it didn't matter because Microsoft was making their way into the homes of millions of people, and they were spreading around like wildfire. And with Windows 95, they just helped push the ease of use into the personal computing space even further. Windows 95 wasn't perfect. No operating system is, of course.
Running Windows 95 was a little bit like running Linux today. If it worked really fucking well. If something fucked up, you might as well run out of this room screaming. The thing is with Windows 95, it fucked up way more than Linux fucks up. You basically ran everything directly to the fucking kernel. Like every program was like knitted into the kernel directly. There was not kernel layers and kernel protection and stuff like that. So if Notepad crashed, which it probably did a lot of times, if you try to fucking type penis too much, your whole operating system will fucking just shit it pants because it didn't have memory protection and all that fucking shit. If a game crashed and stuff like that, again, it would just because it was like, it didn't have the protection layers that modern operating systems have. And even back then, Linux didn't have much of that either. It had memory protection, but not much more. Linux back in 1995 was not Linux as we see it today. Linux in 1995 was like DOS. Like, you could get graphical user interfaces, but most it was just like running DOS.
But I think it should still be remembered as an imperative piece of personal computing history. And for me, it'll always have a special place right here.
It's probably because a lot of us that if you're like in your mid-30s and up, you probably started running computers with a Windows C, the 98 or 95 machine. Again, a paradigm that is used to this day that they made popular and some things they introduced. You're running Linux right now where not most, but a lot of the UI heritage titties goes down to Windows 95. It was like, when did this start to become a thing that we are doing under GNOME and KDE and XFCE and even i3 under Linux? It mostly stemmed from the way 95 did it, Windows 95 did it. So think about this. You're running Linux right now and you're still influenced by a Microsoft product. You're still doing things that was pioneered or made popular by a Microsoft product in 1995. And that's not bad, don't get me wrong. It's not like we should be like, oh my god. It's not bad, it's just they just set a standard, and that's the standard users wanted. And then we just refined it and built on top of it, both on the Windows world, the Mac world, and the Linux world. We just all did our own thing and built on top of it. And in the Linux world, we had like XFCE, GNOME, and KDE, and all those things. They just did their own little tweaks to it, their own little refinements. But a lot of the core things that you do in a graphical user interface was made an unofficial standard in 1995 because Windows propelled it into popularity. Windows 95 changed the computing world, just like the iPhone changed the phone world. It was not the first with a lot of technologies, but they changed it. Really interesting. See you all later. Bye bye.